weather is great because it's warming up finally.
Yeah. I just moved to Huntington Beach.
Yeah.
And so I live like, Main Street, like downtown
Yes.
Huntington, like 5 minutes up right off Main Street.
Yeah.
And like every day I'm like pinching myself.
That's a beautiful area.
Oh
I
my
did see
God.
that you moved, and so I'm happy that looks like a great space for you.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
amazing. I used to live there when my son Ryder, when he was born.
Okay.
We lived there. And it's funny because we literally lived like 5 streets over from where we're at now, just coincidentally.
Right.
And so he was born there. So I feel like he always just had this like tie subconsciously to Huntington Beach.
Right. And now he's back.
And now he's back because we were probably there for like 4 or 5 years. And then I moved away. And obviously I just went through a breakup a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I got to get back to the water because I was living inland.
Yes.
And I swear to God, Miko, was like, as soon as I got back to Huntington and to the water and actually like got our own house together, me and my son, and it's just us. And I'm like, oh my God, like it feels so good.
Home.
Like home.
It's grounding.
It's so grounding.
Yeah. So I actually just moved as well.
Okay.
I moved out of my mom's, finally got my own apartment.
Nice. Congratulations.
Which has been huge.
Yeah.
And also a shock to my finances because I'm not used to
paying for everything
and all these things. I mean, I am because some, in my using, I still had to pay rent and bills, but it just wasn't the right way.
Yeah.
And so now it's like, it's just a change. And so I do have roommates, but I get along with them great. I love them. And also I live with my boyfriend.
Oh, sweet.
So we are in Ventura.
Okay.
Also near the water. I mean, it's not like as close as maybe you are.
Yeah.
But it's like living out there is just so different because you're like near water.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Like when I first got sober, I had a really hard time with like, okay, praying and God and all of that. And so I used the ocean as like my higher power. And I still sleep. I was talking about this the other day on a podcast. I still sleep to like a sound machine that's waves. Like, cause I've done that since I got sober and it's grounding for me.
It is. And I think when I was younger, I was actually certified as a scuba diver.
Nice.
And so I've actually been certified since, 2006. And it's something that it was a thing that my dad and I used to always do. So I haven't actually brought myself to do it yet, but it's like now that I'm living, because I actually used to go out on the boats right out of Ventura.
Nice.
So now that I'm like living near there, I'm like, I really should like go back out there because
hell yeah.
When I don't know if you've ever been scuba diving.
I've snuba'd a bunch of times where it's like you just go down like 25 feet.
Right.
But yeah.
So so you get it though, because when you're underwater, like you can't hear anything except the water.
It's amazing.
And it's like this other world where you're just like what a meditation space. Obviously you can't just like meditate underwater, but it's like when you're down there, it's just you and the water and whatever you're looking at.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of like I've been to Hawaii and scuba dive there, and it's like, it's just beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a whole nother world.
It totally is. And you just feel like so present and weightless.
Right.
Like I know when I did snuba or even just like snorkeling in Hawaii, mainly that's when I did it. And it was just the most amazing feeling.
Right.
Like you're not worrying about anything. You're not thinking about anything. You're just right there in the moment. Well, if you go do that, let me know because we're always out trying to find fun things to do in sobriety. And so I'm out there doing like fun activities.
Yeah.
So
and I think it's summer. So there's a lot of little classes. Like you said, you've done snuba. So if you're not a certified scuba diver, you can go up to 25 feet.
Okay.
And you can just kind of do like a introduction course. So you kind of learn some of the safety things and then they take you, 25 feet. It's still enough to be under the water.
Let's plan it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's definitely plan it.
Great.
But yeah, I also understand and can relate to like becoming responsible 100% for yourself and being out there. And as a woman, it's such a great space to get to that point, to being able to be independent and not have to rely on anybody.
Right.
Like I've always been in a relationship. And so I've had that person to fall back on and not like stress like, oh, okay, well, they're going to help or they're going to take care of things or whatever. And so now it's the same situation for me. Like I'm completely on my own with my son. Like I can't even, it was probably, it was back when I lived in Huntington before. So we're going back like over 10 years where I've like was just on my own completely paying for things. So yeah, that's tough, but it gives people hope, especially women,
Yeah.
early in recovery, because it takes a long time. I mean, it took me a few years to even get to the point where I could essentially be in a living situation where I could be contributing and doing all that. So what did it look like for you? So you've been with your mom for how long?
So when I got clean,
when was that?
2018. So September 2018. So next month is actually my 5 years, which is
right on.
Wild.
Yay.
But I hadn't lived at home, probably at least for a decade almost. And some of that was like I was in college and kind of the beginning of my addiction.
Yeah.
Before I really realized that like it was an addiction. And then definitely when I was sure that I was an addict and kind of kept going, I was very in and out. So it's like I would come home at nighttime and like shower and change clothes and then leave. So I didn't have to see anybody.
Yeah.
And then eventually I like found the boyfriends that have the homes or whatever. So when I got clean, I actually was when I got busted and they put me on house arrest and sent me back to my parents' house.
Okay.
And that was with the federal government. And so they forced me back home. And since then I like went to treatment, did all the things, which we can talk more about too. Yeah. But, I've been there since then.
Okay.
And that was August of 2018. I got clean in September. So clearly there was still a little bit of time there where I wasn't quite on board yet. But it's like I started working within the first, 6 months. And like I've always had good work ethic, which also transferred into my using because that's how I ended up with my case. But good work ethic. And so once I started back into the workplace, I was like, oh yeah, like this is what it was to make money and start to pay off some of my debt. Yeah. And get to a place where also like I have a good credit score, or stuff like that.
Stuff like that's so important.
It's so important. And I finally, it's like at 4 years and some months, I finally was like, oh, like I can actually get an apartment and get approved. Yeah. And have my name on a lease. And, and I was worried that I had like a eviction because I was evicted at one point when I was using. And I don't know if it's just been enough time or what really happened with that, but it wasn't quite on there. So I got lucky, I think. I just got lucky.
I had one too that was associated with my marriage. And it never has showed up, which is really odd.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't know.
Knock on wood.
Why? Because we definitely were evicted. There was definitely all the paperwork. And so I'm not really sure what happened. But it's like one of those things where I'm like, I'm just not going to pry.
Yep. We'll just leave that alone. That's just God working for me because I'm doing good in my life.
Exactly.
So what was your drug of choice?
So my drug of choice was meth primarily. Okay. But honestly, when I was younger, probably before I got into like hard drugs, was alcohol. Okay. For sure. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I also did, really it was like whatever you have. And I've tried just about everything. There was a couple there that I didn't do just because like in my head I was like, well, I didn't like to do multiple drugs at the same time. Because sometimes they make like, I'm like, oh, I'm already high on meth. So like, why would I want to do heroin? Right. I'm like, I don't want to, it doesn't make sense. Like, I feel like I'm just going to be normal. Right. Nobody wants that. But if we were out of meth and someone had heroin, I was like, yeah, let's do it. So, but primarily was meth.
Okay. Yes. And how was your childhood?
Childhood was pretty good. So I was adopted. Okay. I was a baby. My older brother and I were adopted together. He was 4. I was about 18 months when I went to live with my parents. Around 3 years old, it was finalized. And so I've always felt that they were my parents. Yeah. But of course, I think there was some deeper abandonment issues that happen just sort of naturally when you don't have your biological parents raising you. Yeah. But I was never like, I don't want to say that like, oh, I was an addict because I was abandoned. But I think some of the deeper issues were rooted in that, as much as I, don't blame it. Yeah. But childhood was good. So my parents were in their 40s when they adopted me and my brother. So they were a little bit more like set. Yeah. And so we did a lot of, very like middle class sort of home where I had like both parents worked. I went to school. I was a good student. I did gymnastics for a long, long time, all the way up through high school. Like my junior year, I think right before my senior year, I retired. because I just wanted to kind of have like a normal senior year of high school.
Do you feel like you didn't get a normal childhood because you were doing gymnastics all the time?
You know,
is that a thing?
I don't see it that way.
Okay.
But then it's sometimes like people are like, oh, have you seen this? Like, don't you remember this movie or like whatever? I'm like, no. And they're like, why not? And I'm like, because I spent 24 hours a week in the gym.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I think we had Wednesdays and Sundays off. So like Wednesdays were like at the time it was like I was getting ahead in reading and homework or catching up.
Yeah.
And Sundays were like, you just relax, you know, maybe that was the day where I could watch a movie. But a lot of the things, I mean, there were some trends obviously that were like huge, but I think, I didn't have a lot of like, just go and hang out with your friends. Cause even Saturdays were like, I was in the gym at 9 a.m. until like 2, I think it was.
Oh, wow.
You know, we had like a lunch break. So, you know, my life was very structured. And I think that I definitely had some behaviors when I was younger. Like I stole books from a book fair, you know, and that was like in elementary school. And I remember distinctly like when I got caught because like you know, people told other people like, oh, you know, so-and-so stealing. So it came out, right? And instead of feeling like, oh my God, I shouldn't be stealing, I remember distinctly being like, I shouldn't tell people that I'm doing something wrong.
You had the ism.
Yeah. And it's like that wasn't taught to me.
Yeah.
You know, I was taught what was right and wrong, but for whatever reason, like in my brain, just how I thought was like, oh, I shouldn't tell people. And also I remember trying to make up a lie to try and be in less trouble.
Yeah.
Right. And so that, and like when I did step work, right, because that's my the way that I do this is like in my step work I found those moments where I was like, oh, I remember, you know, way back, because I was like maybe 8 or 9, and like that's pretty young to be having this like thought process of like, oh, don't tell people. You know? Like,
I had memories way back too where now looking back it's like, oh yeah, it started young where I had such an addictive personality.
Right.
Like I would take like the little chewable vitamin C's. I don't know how I didn't get sick, but I would like take the bottle and I'd go in the bathroom and I'd lock the door and I'd go into the tub and I'd close the curtain and I'd just sit in there and like eat vitamin C's.
Yeah.
And then I would get enough money together, like my allowance for the week or whatever would be like $20. And I had this little corner store by the house where I grew up, right in the forest, essentially in Canada. And I would run up to this corner store, and you know those little like candies that you could get, and they're the old school, like in those plastic bins and the little keys and sours, and you could take the little tweezer things and get them out like 5 cents each. Well, I would buy the whole thing, and they knew that I was coming, so it would be like sealed. Yeah, it'd be like $20 for the
new
whole
one just for you.
like this big.
Yeah,
there's like 100 of them in there, or whatever. And I would run all the way home with this container, and I would sit in my room and just eat them until I made myself so sick, and then I'd be so mad at myself.
Right.
And then I would do it again in 7 days.
Right. And like that's, and I feel like maybe even gymnastics sort of covered some of my like ism, because it's like in gymnastics, you're always striving for perfection. Yeah. You're always trying to, you know, like everything is so focused that the structure, and like nobody pushed me to do it. My parents were always like, if you don't want to do gymnastics, you don't have to.
So that was your choice.
Yeah, it was my choice.
Yeah.
I did lots of different things growing up, like dance and soccer. And like I tried a lot of things, and it ended up, you know, being gymnastics. And I mean, I had like a million leotards, like, you know, all the things, like the shorts and all the scrunchies and like just everything. And so it was always something that I wanted to do. And I think that like it's a healthy thing for kids to do because it is so structured. But I feel like sometimes like that inner drive was part of the ism, but it was just masked because like, oh, you're doing well in gymnastics.
Yeah, exactly.
So it makes sense.
And so you retired in high school, so you didn't want to go on and go to the Olympics. Like when you were training so hard for so many years, like what happened?
So of course the Olympics is every little girl's dream. It's so difficult to actually get it, to be that good. It's like a weird mixture of like you have to be born at the right time because, you know, you have to be at least 16, or I think the rule is turning 16 within the year that the Olympics happens.
Oh.
And it's every 4 years. So if you're not born, at the right timing where you will be of that age, then you have to wait another 4 years.
Oh, I never thought about that.
Yeah. So if you're 15 and you don't quite make that cutoff, that means you have to then do it again. You have to be an elite gymnast for another 4 years.
Oh, shit.
Right? To make it to the next Olympics. And elite gymnastics, like the Olympic gymnast, I mean, if you just take out Simone Biles, because she's a beast.
Yeah.
She's
amazing.
I don't even know what.
Talk about a strong woman right there.
She's amazing.
I want to have her on my podcast. Got to make that happen.
Yeah. She has done multiple Olympics, right? And that's like really, really hard because to be at that level of training and discipline, and also her skills are like above board. It's hard to do for multiple years like that. So, she's done it. There's a few gymnasts who have been to maybe 2 Olympics, but that's like a really tough, like a lot of those girls are homeschooled.
Yeah.
They literally are just living in the gym. So the Olympics was a little bit like, obviously the really tough, there's also some politics in gymnastics. So if you're just, there is, unfortunately there is. And so the next goal would be like college gymnastics. Which I was 100% for. I really wanted to get a gymnastics scholarship. But by the time I was 16, I had like 2 slip discs in my back.
Okay.
And also like I had some issues, like I had a bunion fixed really young. And that's just like because I did gymnastics. Yeah. So part of my, I did take a break because of the back injury, and I did have to take like a season off of competing. And it was I think it was like my sophomore year, maybe my freshman year, I don't remember. But that little break, when I came back to competing, I didn't have as much fun after that. And I'm not sure what caused it, but it was just like, it didn't really feel as fun anymore. And, and I think also I will say like a lot of fear was starting to creep in because like, it's like we're doing skills that are much bigger now. And so there was some mental blocks there too. But I think what it came down to was, my junior year of high school, like I was a good student. So I did a lot of get ahead classes. By the time I was a senior, I had a schedule that basically let me out of school at 12. Okay. So I was like, you know what? I just want to have a normal year of high school and just be a normal person without, because all my life it was like, oh, do you want to go to the mall after school? I was like, no, I got to go. I got to go to practice. Right. Yeah. So, and that's, and I think for some sports when you're in high school, like there's a season and gymnastics is year round, and competition season does happen, but you're still training even more so before the season. So it's like a year-round sport. There's no like off and on season. Yeah. So I think that last year I just, the injury and just everything, I kind of gave up on it, and it just lost its sparkle to me. Yeah. And because it was always my drive to do it, my parents supported me in the decision. My coaches were like, you'll be back in a couple weeks. And you weren't back.
So was it hard to find who you were underneath that? Because like if you were the gymnast for all those years.
And I think that's really where my ism started to like really grow, because obviously I had some isms like when I was younger, like some little hints.
Can you explain what the ism is to people out there that are going like, what the fuck
so like addiction, right? The alcoholism, the addiction to whatever it might be, because it could be anything. For me, turned into drugs, started with alcohol. So like that alcoholism, right? So the alcoholism, we say ism. Yep. So that I think started to really grow at that point. I was your normal kid in high school that did go to some, weekend parties, and I did start drinking really early. I did get in trouble in middle school. We like took a beer to school. We stole it out of like the parents' refrigerator, and we got caught for that. And like, but that's like drinking when you're like, I don't know, what was it, like 12 or 13 or something. And so that, was probably a first little marker that there may be like a something, just because like, not everyone was doing that. No. But it, that was something that just sort of was like, oh yeah, let's just steal this beer. Yeah. And I didn't love it. So at the time, it's not like at that point I started drinking heavily, but in high school, I like drank with my brother and his friends, you know, because he was older
Mm-hmm.
and they looked out for me. So it wasn't like at the time I wasn't like getting shit faced in high school, but that was kind of like the beginning. And then once I was done with high school, I started when I turned 18, I started going to clubs, right? Going to like West Hollywood and all these clubs and like the drinking is also, it goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
So I think that's when I really started drinking. And that was like also like drinking and driving.
Oof.
Right. And
yeah.
so at 19, I actually had a DUI.
Oh, wow.
So that, and honestly, like I kind of got away with it. It like we hired an attorney. I did minimal, like he went to courts for like 8 months and we ended up with like some infraction. I went to like, you know, the AA or not the AA. I didn't go to AA. They didn't even send me to meetings. They sent me to a MAD meeting.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I thought it was interesting because I was like, oh, I love listening to people's stories, right? Like I'm adopted. I'm very open about it. So like I always used to love like talking to people and like learning your story. And so it was cool to listen to, but I was like, well, in my head, like my DUI situation was not like her situation. Like the lady that spoke, she had a very tragic, you know, story where she was like dragged under the car and stuff. And so in my head, right, you look at the differences, right? And so, and I learned this now, like when you go to meetings, like when you are new, you start looking at differences where it's like, well, my using wasn't the same as that. So I may not be as bad. But it should have been a red flag, but it just wasn't at the time because I just didn't really know. And, you know, that continued. And I just was, again, I was like, okay, well, don't drink and drive.
Right. Always rationalizing, right?
Like, oh, well, I'll just have a DD, right? And so that then continued. And like when I got to college, I went to the college of my choice. I was at Cal Poly Pomona. I wanted to be a veterinarian. I was in their pre-vet major. And then I was going to school full time. I got a job part time as a vet tech. And I also was going to clubs, and that went from like going to clubs on the weekends to every single day of the night of the week. And I had a schedule, right? Like Mondays I would be at this club, Tuesdays it was this one, and like it was a schedule. And eventually I ended up like promoting for like raves. And so then we're like, you know, I'm out at midnight, 2 a.m., passing out flyers when I should be like sleeping because I have an 8 a.m. lab, you know, in the morning. It's like I'm barely making it to classes. And I remember every semester of college thinking like, this semester I'm going to do better, right? This semester I'm going to really stay on my studying. And I did decent. I didn't like completely flunk out. I mean, I did eventually because it's like I was there for 4 years. I managed to hold on for 4 years.
Wow.
That last year and the last semester, I think by that point, like I signed up for classes, but I just wasn't going.
Yeah.
And I really thought, you know, and like if you look at my transcripts, like you can just see it. And like the decline of grades was like the increase of my disease.
Yeah.
And so eventually I got kicked out because it's like your GPA or whatever it was. And instead of like going through the process to try and like stay in school, I was like, oh, I'm just going to take a break.
Yeah.
And then that's when everything really took a turn for the worse. Like I had a lot of fun. I definitely, you know, I had full time to enjoy going to raves and I was still working part-time. So I still had money.
Yeah.
And it just slowly went from like doing coke to doing, you know, ecstasy. We're doing acid, we're doing mushrooms, we're doing all the fun stuff, ketamine, like all the things. And then, I started dating, and at the time I was dating girls. So there was like a good 3 to 4 years where I was like, you know, in college in my last year of high school, I was like I guess I was like, oh, I'm a lesbian, right? And I don't want to say like it was a phase because some people are like, oh, it's just a phase. It's like, no, not necessarily. Like at the time, like I really did connect with women, and I still can.
Yeah.
But my, you know, just things have changed.
Yeah.
But it's like I started dating this guy, and he was doing meth once a month.
Okay.
And I was
once a month.
I'm like, oh yeah, we can do this once a month. Like it's no big deal. And once a month quickly turned into every day.
Yeah. And it's just, your story is just a reminder that this can happen to anybody.
Yes.
You know, because you come from a good family. Yes, you're adopted, but you come from a good family. You did gymnastics your whole life.
Right.
You went to the school of your choice. I mean, you're smart, you know, all these things. And here you are doing meth.
Right. And it's like and it's like the worst drug.
Yeah.
Right. Cause when you hear of meth, you're like, oh,
yeah.
nobody wants to do meth. But like, and that's something that I think when I finally found recovery, I was like, you know what? Like, it doesn't matter where you come from.
Mm-hmm.
Like addiction and alcoholism, it like can affect anyone, because I think that, people who somehow manage to sort of keep their life together while they're still using,
Mm-hmm.
it's like such a lonely place.
Mm-hmm.
And like people who, I know people who have gotten degrees and like they become doctors and nurses, right? That struggle with the disease of addiction.
Yeah.
And it's like, you would never think that. But that, unfortunately, because you don't look like the homeless, crazy person that's on the street who's clearly, in a psychosis.
Yeah.
Nobody is going to be like, hey, how are you doing?
Yeah. And that was my story too.
Yeah.
I had the things and the life, and I didn't hang out with drug addicts, and it was the loneliest space to be in.
Right. Because it's like nobody knows.
Nobody knew.
And you have like this secret.
Yeah.
And it just seems fine.
Right. And that's when you're like rationalizing all these things. Like, oh, it's not that bad. And, oh, I'll just do this. And you're literally talking to a crazy person because you're talking to this brain that's trying to kill you.
Exactly.
I mean, there was times where I was just like, okay, yep, I'm just going to take these pills for the rest of my life. This is just what's going to happen. And okay, well, now I'm going to do this. And it's like completely insane. Crazy.
And I think I found that same moment where I was never in denial that I was an addict. But it was a point where I was just like, I'm just going to do this forever. And I think, so my last relationship, which was the worst relationship I was ever in, when I was using, we would have those conversations, right? Like he would always be like, oh, you smoke so much, right? And I'm like, you're literally here using with me.
Yeah.
So like, how are you going to judge me? But okay, I'm the one. But he would be like, do you think you're ever going to stop? Like we would have those moments where you like stop and kind of pause. And I would be like, I don't know, like maybe, but in my head, it was like, why would that change? Like and I knew that like there would have to be something that happened. I just didn't know what it was going to be or if it was ever going to happen.
Yeah.
But it definitely did happen.
Yeah.
He and I were doing gift card fraud. It was like this like crazy huge scheme that we set up, and it was very lonely because it was just me and him. Like we didn't want to share it with anyone because that's how we made our money, and we were able to like barely, we survived, right? But yeah, I mean the feds came, and the whole time we're doing it, I'm like, oh well, it's gift cards. Like,
no big deal.
Yeah, it's no big deal. It's a gift card. Like, it's not, it doesn't have anyone's social. Like, no one's name is attached to it. Like, it's a company, right? It's like a big company. So, like, of course, you're stealing from the company. But in my head, it was one of those things where, like, I never stole from people. I stole from corporations.
Yeah. A lot of justifications.
Right. All the justifications. And eventually, and it was always just like, oh, if we do get caught, like, what's the worst that's going to happen? Because they're really, I think now, obviously, there's a lot of like online stuff that happens, but like gift cards are now becoming, more of a thing where people create these schemes. But at the time, because that was like in 2016, it was like people were doing it, but maybe not as large of a scale. And I also feel like our federal case is now something they can use for people who are doing that and get caught now, right? Because
wow, check you out.
Yeah, I was looking at 20 years. It's like
Jesus Christ,
20
really?
years for gift card fraud. Like
20 years.
It's wild.
So when you were facing 20 years, what did that feel like? Holy shit.
It was So that's I don't really have an arrest record, right? Like I'd never really been in trouble minus the DUI. Yeah. And also I was in like a drug raid once, but it was just like I happened to be there when it happened, so I didn't actually get any like charges. So I have been arrested a few times, but this was the craziest experience.
Yeah.
And at the time, it's like I got busted. I remember sitting in the cell and like having all the shackles and just sitting there like, holy shit, like this isn't something that you can get out of.
This is real.
This is real. And this is not where my life is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Like I was just, I mean, that moment of clarity hit me hard. Of course, my first thought was like, I'm not high enough for this. But second was like, oh my God, like what is going to happen? And at the time I was like, something needs to change. Here's the moment. And it was like, a lot. So I went home, right? I'm like home again, living at home on house arrest.
Yeah. So what is your family doing throughout this time?
Oh,
I mean,
man.
are they trying to come in and do interventions and help you, or
Yeah.
have they?
So they, I feel like they didn't know that I was
How bad it
using.
was?
Yeah, they had no
Yeah.
idea. I think they definitely had some suspicion that like something was going on. I mean, I look at pictures of myself and I'm like, how could you not know? But
Yeah.
it was one of those things where like when you don't expect that to be the thing,
Right.
they don't think of it.
Mm-hmm.
But when it finally comes out in the light,
It's
you're
like,
oh,
oh, now it all makes sense.
yeah, now that you weren't showing up for, important
Mm-hmm.
things because you're on drugs. Duh,
You don't look, I mean, a lot of people have a look like,
Mhm.
okay, they did meth for a long time.
Right.
Did you never have that look, even when you were using all the time?
I think there were definitely moments where now that everyone knows, if you look back on pictures, you're like, oh, that's why you were so skinny.
Yeah.
But I think that being a gymnast, also the muscle memory, like
Mm-hmm.
I have huge calves and like, quads from like being a gymnast for so
Yeah.
long that I think that like I looked very toned.
Got it.
And so I think that like people just didn't put
Mm-hmm.
they just didn't quite attach that idea. But
Yeah.
now that everyone knows, they're like, oh, duh, like this makes more sense.
Yeah,
'Cause
I mean,
there was definitely a point where like you could see my
like
ribs
the bones
through
and-
my chest,
Mhm.
and like that is so skinny.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember because I was doing a lot of Adderall, which is essentially like meth.
Right.
My head would be like, oh, it's not
Prescription.
meth because it's just Adderall. Like, come on, right?
Yeah.
But I got so skinny, like
Mhm.
anorexic skinny, and people didn't know what I was doing, but
Right.
people started reaching out to me saying like even people would send me pictures of myself that I
Mm.
was posting.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is like back. Well, this still is Facebook days. I'm like, how far back is this? Is it
Facebook is
MySpace?
pretty, but
It was-
Facebook is old now.
The
so-
Facebook's old now. So yeah, it was Facebook. And they would like send me a picture and say, just say, are you okay?
Right.
And I'd
Yeah.
be like, what the fuck? Yeah, I'm
I
fine. But
think also I was so isolated from people
mm-hmm.
that like nobody had anything to compare it to.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know. I feel like I kind of like weight wise, there was a point towards like the end of my using where I weighed like 93 pounds,
Wow.
which was really
Skinny,
tiny.
yeah.
Yes. But most of the time I tried to weigh about 100, which is what I weighed in high school. And so like it kind of just all
Mm-hmm.
blended together.
Mm-hmm.
Minus what most meth addicts, like your face gets really skinny.
Yeah.
Like your cheekbones or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that like even that wasn't that drastic.
Mm-hmm. So you hit it for a lot longer,
Yeah,
obviously.
I did.
Yeah.
But once it came out, my
Mhm.
parents were very supportive.
You have amazing.
I know. They
Miko's
were
parents, you guys are amazing.
yeah, they were like, oh, like, okay, so you have this, you're on drugs. And so they were like, just, obviously they didn't really know what to do. But, my brother had struggled with some things.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, so my brother had struggled with some things when he was like, his last few years of high school. And I
Mhm.
think they had some counseling and some things there, but it wasn't quite like, oh, he has an addiction. We
Mhm.
just kind of like assumed some things.
Yeah.
And then he moved away for some time. So he like moved up north to like start this whole weed growing business.
Okay.
And so he kind of was gone for a little bit. So, but we knew that like prior, like his senior year of high school, he was probably for sure on drugs.
Okay. Probably for sure.
Probably for sure on drugs. But we just never, it wasn't like he didn't go to treatment and like do all the things that I did.
Mhm.
But he also like found his way out of whatever it was going on with him. 'Cause he's not really like an addict now. He doesn't like, he smokes weed, but it's like,
Yeah.
whatever. But so they had some information, but they kind of were like, oh, like, what do we do? However, I think also because I was kind of willing to accept it. I wasn't like, no, I'm not an addict. And
Yeah.
like, they were like, we need you to go to treatment. We need it to be inpatient. Like this is the feds, right? Like my whatever probation people or whatever you call them.
Yeah,
And
those people.
Yeah, the people that were
The
like
people.
making sure I wasn't doing more crimes.
Yeah.
They were like, we need you to go to treatment. We don't think you should do outpatient. We think you should go inpatient. And I was like, yes, like, let's do it. Obviously not. I was like, but can we do it tomorrow? Right. Like that.
Mhm.
I just need to go home one more time.
Yeah.
But it still took some time, but, my parents were very supportive. My dad used to drive me to meetings. My
Nice.
first, like before I went to treatment, we set up
Mhm.
like one meeting per day.
Mm.
And I had no idea about meetings.
Yeah.
So I started going to these meetings. I was still high.
Mhm.
And because at the time, like I didn't know how to stop.
Yeah.
Right? The concept of like not picking up was
like I don't know how
I
to
don't
do
know
that.
how to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
And the boyfriend?
He went on the run. So when
Okay.
I got busted, I was the only one home. He was like kind of, he didn't come home because like I called him
Let him know.
and like put the phone down so he could like hear what was going on. Because I didn't know what to do. I was like, I don't know what to do. I was like, you can come home or not. I don't know. Whatever you want to do. So he stayed out for a little bit. He was kind of like on the run. But he actually got busted leaving my house because I had snuck him in, which was one of the things that I wasn't supposed to be in contact with him. But how else was I going to get drugs?
Right, of course.
And so he finally got busted. So I was going to meetings. I was high every time. I was like smoking in the bathrooms, right? Like during the coffee breaks. Like I didn't really want to talk to anyone. But my dad would take me and he would kind of like sit, he would either be outside waiting or just kind of like sit over there so I could kind of have my space.
Yeah.
But I had to have a chaperone because they didn't trust me. I'm like, oh, the GPS monitor wasn't enough. You also had to make sure my parents went with me. But people started approaching me, and I think so. The first 45 meetings I went to, I was still high, and I went to the same meetings every week because my pretrial officer was just like, go to this schedule of meetings, and I was like, I want an hour outside of my house.
Yeah.
So I did, and it was okay. It's like, I was very skeptical because I was like, I don't really know what to expect, and these people say that they're clean for, people like so my current sponsor, I saw her take a 7-year cake. And I was like, there's no way this girl, if you saw her, I'll have to show you a picture of her. She's amazing. But she like wears, like a rainbow cardigan with like galaxy leggings, right? And she's got these like Doc Martens that are like glitter and like Hello Kitty shit all right. And she has big glasses and she's like Asian, right? So it's like I was like, there's no fucking way this girl's clean. Like there's no way. Look at her. And then I saw her take a 7-year cake and I was like, I can't even get 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Like how are you getting set? There's no way. Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Look at you. Also no way. There's absolutely no way. And she came up to me. I think it was like my the second or third meeting I ever went to. She was so nice. Aww. She was like, oh, hi. Like, like the approaching the newcomer. Right. And she's like, how are you? Like, who are you? And I cried at her. And like at the time, like I'm not a crier. I'm a crier in movies, but I'm not like, I'm not, it's hard. I really shove feelings deep down.
Yeah.
And I cried at her because like she asked me and I was just so overwhelmed because I was like, oh my God, like there's just so much going on, you know? And it was weird, but then she like gave me her number and she's like, call me. And at the time I didn't have a phone. I had a tablet. I was like, I'll give you my text now number when I get home because they took my phone. Like super weird. But like, she like got the numbers going on like the thing that you pass around and I kind of would check in with her and she like kind of gave me some rundown of things and I'm like listening to people talk about steps and like I'm seeing them at the meetings on the wall and I'm just like, I don't understand. Like, how do you work these things and how are they supposed to help me stop using? But eventually like, I went to treatment. So I found myself a bed. I kept using and kept testing dirty. So they were like, actually the Monday that I went to treatment, which was September 17th, I was supposed to go back to court because they were like, you like are talking to the boyfriend, you're using drugs still, like you're, I'm violating my rules of being on house arrest. And so I knew we were going back to court to discuss me being out. And so the following week when I heard like, okay, you're going back to court, I was like, okay, I really need to find a bed in treatment. Cause like, I just want to go to treatment. Yeah. Like by that time I was like, I don't want to be doing this anymore. Like, I don't know how to stop. And so I kept calling and calling, right, the treatment center that I went to. And they were like, okay, come Monday, right? Same day that I'm supposed to go to court. So I call my pretrial officer. I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to go into Impact on Monday. So as soon as we're done with court, I will go straight there. And so what she ended up doing was getting my my meeting in court, like taken off the schedule. And she's like, go to treatment. Do not be late. You better make it there. And then I'll come see you while you're there. And I was like, because she's like, we want to give you the opportunity to get clean, and I was like, okay. So I went to treatment.
Yeah.
And I honestly, I really had an easier time of it, I think, than some people, because I feel like by the time all of this was happening, I was so ready.
You were done.
I was so ready to be done. Because I was
Yeah.
just like, oh my God, like this is just turning into a nightmare.
Yeah.
And
I mean, could you really see like this is not the life I want to live? Like this
yes.
is not me.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
was like, I'm just so ready to not be in trouble anymore. And
Yeah.
and I was like, that was the biggest thing, is like, I know I have to stop using because I want to get rid of being in trouble. Right. So that was like my initial motivation was definitely this legal case. Because then when we went to court, I was in treatment actually. And this is where you were asking, like, what does it look like to be looking at 20 years?
Yeah.
I didn't know that until we went to court at one point when I was in treatment. And we like did a quick, I don't remember what it was, but it was just like, we went down there, we talked about the case, and they were like, okay, this is what you're looking at. And I was like, what?
Yeah, this is not my life. Yeah.
I was like, and I'm like doing the math, right? I'm like 29. So I'm like 20 years. I'm going to be 49 when I get out of jail or prison. Like, I cannot.
Yeah.
Right. So I was like, okay, we got to figure something out. So it took 3 years to get all of the court stuff done.
Wow.
Which for me was like a guaranteed 3 years of being clean, because I was like, all right, we're in treatment.
Yeah.
I got to do the things. I cannot pick up drugs.
Yeah.
Because I just got to figure out how to like get this court stuff situated. So I ended up, so the first 2 years was like, I went to treatment. I got kicked out of treatment. It's co-ed. There were guys there. I kissed one of them. I wasn't supposed to be talking to guys. Kissed them at a meeting. Somebody told, whatever. I like to break rules and I like to try and get away with it. It didn't work out so well there. Because that place is very special. It's very, very structured. They have they have a lot of rules and a lot of people hate it. But like, honestly, like now looking back, I totally get it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like I wish every treatment center could have this kind of structure.
Yeah.
But they've been around a long time. They know what they're doing. So I got kicked out at like 39, 40 days. And I was like, well, now's the time. Like I could either use because I fucked up, or I could just like keep going and see what happens.
Yeah.
And so I called my person and I was like, yo, I fucked up. I got kicked out. And at the time when I went into treatment, she came to visit me. She said, if you don't complete this program, I don't have your back anymore. And I was like, fuck, I really fucked up. So I was like, oh shoot, I'm going to prison. Like I'm like, for sure, this is what's happening. I was like, but I'm not going to use because maybe it'll save me from going. So they gave me another 30 days to try and hang myself before I went back to court. In that 30 days, I set up 2 meetings a week. I was doing this, I forget what it's called, MRT, which is like moral recognition therapy.
Okay.
It's like a program through the court. So I would go down there once a week to go to this class. And like we had a workbook and it was like the dumbest thing. I hated it. I was like, this is so stupid in elementary. It was like a workbook. We had to draw pictures and all these weird things. And at the time I was like, this is dumb.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like, but you do it anyway.
But you do it anyways.
Yeah,
and you stay consistent.
I was like, whatever. Like, I want to just get this shit done. Right.
Yeah.
And like, I have discipline, right? Like since I was a kid, like I'm very disciplined. So I was like, whatever, I can do this even though I think it's dumb.
Yeah.
And eventually in that workbook, we actually got to a point where it was asking about goals. And it was like, what are your 1-year goals? And what are your 5-year goals? And what are your 10-year goals? And I was like, holy shit, I haven't thought about goals in so long.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, this is actually kind of refreshing. So it's like, even though it was something that I thought was really dumb in the beginning, like it ended up being something that I like needed because I was like, oh, I'm not using drugs anymore. Like I can set goals.
Yeah.
And it was like such a, like an eye-opening experience out of this dumb little workbook that I was like,
yeah.
And so like, it was really nice to do it because eventually like it just kind of like it all fit together with like going to meetings and starting to be of service and doing the work. And like that girl that I saw take a 7-year cake, I asked her to be my sponsor. And she and I have been like rocking ever since I had like 40 something days.
That's amazing.
And it's like that.
I'm sorry, just turn the AC on. It's like warm in here. Okay.
Yeah. So that experience was really great because it was like, okay, now, I'm finally starting to be reintroduced to myself the right way. Because when I was left to my own, like in my early, 20s, when I stopped doing gymnastics and was like in school and like doing what I was supposed to be doing, I really didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of like you know, hanging out with all these different people and like going to the college parties, and like that was fun and normal, but then also like going with like the bad boys and like, you know, I was trying to just fit in everywhere.
Yeah.
And I remember like the first boyfriend that I had when I first got clean, like, you know, too early when they tell you not to be dating.
I did the same thing.
Yeah. He was like, I remember one time, cause we had been doing a couple things, like I had a couple things that I knew I liked, and I liked disc golf and like Marvel characters and Disney, right? So like there was like these things that like I knew I liked. And so he and I would go to like Comic-Con, and like that was kind of his thing, but I was like happy to go because I like comics, you know, I can appreciate it. And I like Marvel. He's more of a DC person, whatever. And at one point he was like, well, what do you like? Because we were doing a lot of things that like he liked. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I didn't know, you know, I was like, it's one of those things where I was like, well, I like what you like. What do you mean? Right? Because that's how it's always been. And so at that point I figured out like, you know, I don't really know who I am, what I like. And so that relationship obviously didn't work out. I was in it, and then I felt like relationships are hard. But
yeah, they are.
Yeah. But that one was just really early. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was looking for. And then, you know, it's just, he's a great person. But I ended the relationship, and it was probably that was the first relationship that I actually ended in a healthy way.
Nice.
And also that I ended.
Yeah.
A lot of the time in the past was like, you know, you're cheating on me, I'm cheating on you because you're cheating on me, and then now I'm going to make it known that I'm cheating on you so that you dump me.
Super unhealthy. Yeah.
So bad. And so that was a good experience also, because it was like, even though it was like scary and weird, I'm like the biggest people pleaser. So like I avoid confrontation like the plague, and having to be like, hey, like I'm not. Also, my dad had died at the like kind of around the same time. So like my emotions at the time were just like off.
Yeah.
Everything, you know, and I didn't, you know, that was like, that's a huge thing. Like when your parent passes, it's like, what, like, you know, and also it was like super early on. I only had 15 months clean when my dad passed. So number one reservation, you know, if a parent passes away, like there's no way I could stay clean. And then also like I realized like I'm in this relationship, which I think also like my dad dying had a huge part in like me feeling like I didn't want to be with this person because I just lost sight of everything, you know. But at the time, because that first year I had so much of my foundation built in the program, and I was gaining so much of myself back, that I knew that actually using didn't cross my mind, which I think is such a blessing. Which was great. But it's like, you know, the first thing I did was like call my sponsor, you know, and like, and she had actually been through it with her father. Same exact disease, like he had cancer, he had lung cancer. So when my dad was diagnosed, he had stage 4 lung cancer. It took him out in 3 months. My sponsor's dad had the same diagnosis, but he was, I think she had like 3 years with him or something. So she kind of like walked me through a lot of the stuff. Like I was like, okay, they're going to try this, you know, infusion, whatever, like not chemo, but some other thing. And she's like, okay, yeah, like they did that with my dad, and like, here's what to expect. And like, you know, and her experience. Right. And like, and if I've learned anything from that whole experience early on, is that like, we can reach out, and the people who have been through these things will be put in your life.
Absolutely. And
right?
that's
like
so important for us women. We need other women in our lives that are walking with us through these struggles, you know, so we're not doing it in silence. We're not isolating.
Right.
We have people that we can count on, you know, that we can reach out. They can reach out to us. It's so important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
how did you sit with your emotions? What was that like?
I actually didn't.
Okay.
So because I'm a stuffer, like to stuff all my feelings. Well, there was a few different things. So grief is like a weird thing for me. I think I found acceptance of it quickly.
Okay.
Like I didn't really go through a lot of like the anger or like, I know we all know the Kubler-Ross
stages
model,
of,
right? Stages of grief.
Yes.
But I mean, it was kind of one of those things where I was like, okay, you know, he's sick, and I watched him like wither away. And I knew that like he wasn't comfortable. And so when he passed, I was like, okay. The whole time, I think the worst part was like kind of the waiting of like, is it going to be today?
Yeah.
Is it going to
The
be
uncertainty.
tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and because we knew it was coming.
Yeah.
You know, and unfortunately. And but I mean, parents don't live forever.
Yeah.
So, and he was 79. So I think I found some acceptance. Of course, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to go through grief, even though I've accepted that, like, okay, my dad is dead, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't take time off work. I was working at a restaurant at the time, and I was getting these promotions, and so of course, part of me, I think the disease part of me was like, they need you. You can't take time off work.
Yeah.
Which was my own thing, but also I think it kind of helped me just pass some of the time. Because as we prepared for his funeral and everything, like I worked, you know, I kept on my schedule. Christmas was there, which was weird. And every year now for Christmas, because he passed December 21st.
Okay.
So it's like that time of year has now changed a little bit. We still, of course, try and find some joy in it because it's Christmas, but it's always that time, right? But also when so my first year clean was right when he was diagnosed. So when I have my year that comes up, it's always also a reminder of like, this is the time that this happened. But I think that reminder every time is like, you got through that the first year, which was like the thing that I was
one of the hardest things.
Sure gonna take me out. And it didn't.
Yeah.
That I'm like the no matter what club, like I get it.
It just shows you how strong you are.
Yeah.
So how did you start to find like joy and happiness in your life? Like you say that you know, kind of clung on to the boyfriend who, and what he liked. You didn't really know what you liked. How did you start discovering things that you like to do?
Yes. So that has been like a drawn out process. So obviously my first year, I still wasn't sure. And I was just kind of you know, the first 3 years I was really just trying to get through the court stuff. And of course I wasn't really sure if I was going to stick around after, you know, because I didn't know. But I also felt like by the time I get 3 years, maybe my feelings will have changed about recovery. And I think that, you know, going back into the workforce, getting these promotions, finding a feeling of like purpose again is kind of like where it started. And I was like, okay, you know, we're back in here, we're doing work. And then the pandemic happened. And so I think that like, obviously the restaurants all closed. So I still what I was listening for, especially in like women's meetings, was the women that talked about like self-love. And I was like, what is that like? You know, because I was like, I don't really know. Like I think I'm a good person, right? Like, but you do the step work and you find your defects and you find, you know, ways to try and like replace them, right, with spiritual principles and all these things. So I knew that I was working to be, you know, the best version of myself, but did I really truly love myself? I wasn't sure. So I definitely went through like a few relationships that were maybe like not as toxic as when I was using, but they were not like super healthy because they weren't necessarily based on anything like substantial. Just more like, oh, we like these same things, so we're dating or whatever. And I think that like honestly, the time where I really found my most, you know, truest self was when I spent that time alone. And it was like, you know, okay, I'm no longer doing things that other people want to do, or I don't need their approval to do them. If I want to go do something like, let's say, go to Disneyland, right? So when Disneyland,
because you love Disney,
oh my God, I love Disney. I'm there like every week.
You're a Disney fanatic.
Yes. I bought the pass. Me and Nicole, we both go. I go as often as I possibly can. And so because I find so much joy there. It's like my space.
I love that. Yeah.
And it's like, but in order to be like a Disney adult, you do get a lot of shit for it. I'm not gonna lie. You know, people are like, oh, okay, yeah.
I think it's awesome.
Disney. Yeah.
I love it.
Right. It's like but some people give you shit and it's like, I don't care.
Yeah. It's what you
Am
like.
I forcing you to go?
Right. Exactly.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So I found things that I like started liking just by doing them without, but it took a lot because it took a lot of like finding that courage and that confidence to like take yourself to a movie.
Yes.
Right. Or take yourself to dinner.
That one's hard. That one's hard. Yeah.
Yes. Because you sit there like, well, here we are.
Yeah. And I feel like the biggest, because I do the same thing and I made myself go do those things. And now I love doing those things by myself. But it was a matter of not so much of like that I felt uncomfortable sitting there, but it was the uncomfortableness of what other people were thinking of me.
Right.
And I'm like, it doesn't fucking matter.
Also, I think nobody's looking.
No one's looking, and like, you're not that important.
Right.
No one cares.
Nobody cares.
Like,
because,
really?
Yeah. What I came down to for me too is like, if I'm at a restaurant, I'm not looking to see who's hanging out with who.
Yeah.
Or if somebody's by themselves. I think there's been times where I've seen someone at a restaurant by themselves and I'm like, I should join them. Like, I wonder if they would want someone to sit with them. But like, you know, but it doesn't matter, you know, because, and that's kind of like our, I guess like our ego, right? Like, oh, everyone's making, like, why is she by herself?
Yeah.
But it was such a great thing to do. And also I went on vacation. I went with my biological father to Mississippi. I actually met him when I turned 30. So it's been 4 years now that I've known him. And this was like last summer. So he was talking about like our family in Mississippi, right? And he's like, oh, I wish you could meet these people. And I'm like, he's talked about it like since I've kind of known him. He like tells me information about people. And I finally was just like, well, why don't we go? And he was like, oh my God, like you would go with me? And I was like, yeah, let's just go, you know? So I actually flew out to Tennessee. He met me there in I think it was in Nashville. No, it wasn't Nashville. It was somewhere else. But he picked me up there. We drove down to his family. We like spent some time with them. Then he drove me up to Nashville. And my cousin actually just moved to Nashville. But I really, you know, I spent time with him and that was cool. Like completely different way of living. Yeah. Very small town in Mississippi.
Okay.
And met some family and visited people's properties. And I was like, holy shit, these people have a lot of grass. And, you know, like it's a whole nother world. But when I was in Nashville, there were a couple days there where I had like a large amount of time by myself. Go on a solo trip somewhere, anywhere.
Do it. Women out there, do it.
Go.
I think it's so important.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot, like I also want to go out of the country, but like obviously, you know, do your research, find the places that are safe, and do it because it's so, I mean, it was such a cool experience to just go and do shit that I wanted to do. And like, I'm very social and you don't have to be social to enjoy, you know, these trips, but it's like, I talked to a lot of people that I maybe wouldn't have said hi to or got some recommendations or like just tried some place to eat food because I saw one thing on the menu I wanted.
It's just got to be such an empowering experience, you know, especially for women. We always feel like, and I'm men too, but we feel like we have to have people around us. We have to be with the man or the girl, you know, but it's like, no, like we can do these things by ourselves and have that confidence and that self-love.
And I think it's important to do it. And it's unfortunate that I have to be like, oh, find places that are safe. Because I don't know if men have the same worries that we do as women. It's like, you know, I'm a small person. And so it doesn't matter if I knew, you know, jujitsu or whatever. Like if a man wanted to overpower me, you 100% could. And so I think it's important to kind of like also be aware of like safety things. Like if you're walking around by yourself, just, you know, not having like headphones on so you could, you know, put one in or something because it's like, it's unfortunate because I just don't think like I've had male friends who like have done these solo, you know, multiple countries, whatever. And it's like, I don't know if they have to, obviously, you know, getting pickpocketed, but like, do you have to worry about like somebody kidnapping you?
Probably not. Probably not usually the same worries. We have different ones. That's for sure. What would you say to women out there that, aren't recognizing the red flags, you know, because when you look back now, you see these isms, these red flags. What are those red flags to be conscious of, to be mindful of, so that you don't go down that road? Or if you're starting to go down that road, you can catch yourself.
Right. So I think it's like for me, there was a moment where I had gotten in trouble, like it was the drug raid situation. And I had the attorney that I used for my DUI. We kind of stayed in contact afterwards because, like, I don't know, he was a cool guy. I still talk to him today.
That's cool.
Yeah, he's cool. He's a super dope person. But I had called him because I was like, holy shit, like all this shit just went down. And he was like, well, stop hanging out with those people and like don't do drugs. And he's like, can you do that? And I said yes, but I hung up and I immediately knew that I couldn't. And so I think that like those moments, right? I wish I would have just called him back because I hung up the phone and I started crying. Because I was like, oh my God, like I really can't control this. And in that moment, I don't want to say that like I was like, oh, I was definitely addicted, but it wasn't quite to the point where like if someone would have been like, like if I had actually gotten in trouble in the drug rape and had to go to treatment or something, maybe that would have changed my route of things.
Yeah.
Right. And so when those moments come up, if you find yourself lying, right? If you find yourself having to hide certain things because you don't think they would be acceptable. I lived in a house. It was a trap house. It was a house where they were like making wax and DMT and all, and everyone's doing cocaine. And I was doing meth at the time. And I was like afraid that people would find out. Right. And so it's those little, maybe it won't be as extreme as that, but like, you know, if maybe you find yourself waking up and taking a couple sips of alcohol, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, like I probably shouldn't be doing that, right? Those are the kind of
the
like
little voice.
Like those moments, like those are things to pay attention to, right? Because if you find yourself waking up where you have to take a couple sips of alcohol because maybe you're sick, it's like that's something to look at, you know, because otherwise if you just continue, like we know where it goes.
Yeah.
You know, and it's hard because I think there was a lot of fear. Like if I had picked up the phone and called, you know, my attorney back and been like, actually, like I don't, you know, what do I do? Like that would have been a changing point in my life.
Yeah.
You know.
And what about the girls out there that say, oh, I can't find the right girls to be around, or I can't find the right support group, and they're just not like me and I'm different. You know, what do you say to those women out there and those girls?
It's so tough because I get
I
it.
was that girl.
Me too.
For a long time.
Yeah. I mean, minus my gymnastics friends, and like people that I went to high school with, which obviously we kind of were like in high school together. I had a lot of guy friends in college.
Yeah.
And it was kind of the same thing. It was like, you know, I just never felt like women. I don't know. I don't have like a huge group of women friends. You know, I have a select few. But I feel like if you're like really struggling with that, like today there's so many resources. Like I know like Instagram has like, I wanted to go and check it out. It's like this group of girls that go down to the beach and they meet like once a month or something. And it's like, they're all strangers, but they just go and meet there.
That's
so
really
like,
cool.
It's like, find something that you like,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
a hobby or like I like disc golf, and in disc golf, there is a small group of women who play, right? And it's a smaller group of people, but like, they're all cool.
Yeah.
You know, and like disc golf is very similar to recovery where you could go like to any state and there's like a course you could play.
Oh, nice.
And like the local people are usually really nice.
Okay.
So it's very like they're very welcoming. And so finding something you like, maybe it's painting, maybe it's going on hikes, right? Like there's so many resources today where you can look online and find like I think there's a website called like Meetup.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And so you can like go on there and find some whatever, crocheting. I don't know.
You know what I mean? Like if you find that activity, then you're going to find the people. Yeah.
Because also I think part of my own issue with other women was I felt like they didn't like me because it was my own shit. You know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's also another part to look at is like, is it really that they don't like me and that I don't fit in, or is it myself kind of like forcing me out? Right.
Yep. That's a very good point. And then lastly, I love to talk about purpose.
Yes.
So purpose and passion.
Yes.
So how did you find your purpose and what drives you and what you want to do to give back and help others?
Right. So I've always wanted to help people, like being adopted. My mom's been a part of this organization called Friends of Foster Children for a long time. I've always kind of had this like pull to work with foster children in some way. And, you know, now that I have gone through so much of like, obviously I work in, well, you know, they don't. I work in treatment. And I found this opportunity. I mean, during COVID, I started working in treatment. It wasn't something that I was like, oh, I'm going to work in treatment. Like, I actually didn't really want to work in treatment at all because my one experience with treatment was like, I was like, oh my God, I would never want to work there. That just seems like so much.
Yeah.
And why would anyone want to do that? And I found myself, you know, working because I needed a job. Like, I was too bored. And I was like, well, working, you know, as a tech, it's not going to be like, it can't be that bad, right? So I started working in treatment and I like really, really loved it. And I don't want to say advanced. I like progressed really quickly.
You grew.
Yeah, I grew, right? So you grow because I was like, oh, I love this, right? And I found this like calling where it's like, I get to help people, right? Because I've always wanted to help people. And now I get to help in this way. And then of course I also have like recovery to thank as well, because it's like part of being in recovery. It's like we do service.
Yeah.
And so I keep my recovery and work very separate. I have sponsees and I have, you know, my recovery set up, and then I have work stuff because I feel like, that's what I get paid to do. So it's not quite recovery.
It cannot be your
It's
recovery.
not.
You have
It's
to have your
100%
balance.
Exactly.
Yep.
So I found this career where like I get to help people and become a resource to people. I feel like as it grows, like I'm back in school. Well, I took a little break, but I'm going to be going back, into school. My end goal is to be like a licensed therapist.
Amazing.
And I think that like somewhere in there, I can tie in the foster children thing. And also because a lot of kids who go through the foster care system end up as addicts. It just is, and that's why I kind of always like to share that I was adopted because I know, right? There's a thing when you meet someone else who's been adopted. They're like, oh, you too? And it's like, you just automatically have this like
bond,
soul connection where you're like, oh, I get you.
Yep.
Right. And it doesn't matter if like some people were adopted into like not as great of a family as mine. And for that, I'm grateful, but I still get it. Right.
Yeah.
Like, we still get each other. And so I think that like somehow I'm going to tie all this in together.
Absolutely. I could see that for you, for sure.
And I really, like, I think one of my goals currently with my current position at Altitude is that I really want to figure out how to be a resource to like families with kids that they've adopted and like who may be struggling.
Yeah.
And I haven't quite figured it out yet, but that's definitely something that I have talked to like my boss about. It's like something where I'm like, I really, really feel passionate about this. And I know that there's a need. I just need to find where are they?
Yeah, no, there's definitely a need for that. I mean, I've even seen it and I'm not in that inner circle. So yeah, anyway, I can support you in that. You can come on here, be a voice for it, whatever you need.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
I'm there for you. What has giving back given you the most?
So I think, let's see, giving back. It gives me, it feeds my purpose, I feel like I took so much from society when I was using and scheming systems, right? That now that like I can actually give back and do something that's good and is helping people in a positive way.
Yeah.
It makes me just feel like, okay, this is my true purpose.
Yeah.
And I'm fulfilling that role, right? Like my higher power wants me to be a good person. Doesn't mean I'm perfect.
Right.
But as long as I can try my best and do as much as I possibly can without like it being too much, because that's my defect.
Yeah.
Then I'm doing the right thing, and I know what feels good and what doesn't. It's like, and I tell this story a lot when I'm sharing at meetings, but it's like, things like paying for all of the bananas that I'm purchasing at self-checkout or paying for the grocery bags that I use because I'm never remembering my own.
Yeah.
Like those little bits of honesty and integrity, it's like so huge for me because I would buy one stick of deodorant and leave with a bunch of groceries.
Right. And that's how it starts. Right. So
right.
yeah, having that brutal honesty, I'm the same way.
Yeah.
So
it's like so important. And I think it's kind of silly because I think most like normies wouldn't. They're like, well, duh. Or they're like, well, what's the big deal? It's 20 cents for 2 bags. But like for me, it's very important because if I don't do it, when I walk away from there, it's like this little...
That feeling.
It's this little ick.
And we can't have those icks anymore.
No, we sure can't.
Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you for all you do in the community.
Yeah,
Everybody loves you. You're amazing.
Oh, thanks.
And I love you.
I love you.
All right. All right, you guys. Thanks for being here for Women's Wednesday. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.